Brother, if you are a connoisseur of scary stories, then subscribe to my channel so as not to lose it and give it a like. I will be grateful to you. The clearing of the storeroom began as a mundane chore, but it quickly spiraled into an eerie odyssey through decades of forgotten relics and unsettling discoveries. The author, steeling themselves for the task ahead, ventured into the dim, dust-choked confines of the cluttered space, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a heavy heart. The air was thick with the musty scent of neglect, and the floor, hidden beneath layers of discarded memories, creaked ominously with each step. Among the first items unearthed were old window frames, their once sturdy wood now brittle and splintered with age. Each frame seemed to whisper secrets of long-forgotten days, their glass panes cloudy and cracked, reflecting ghostly images of the past. There were bags filled with assorted parts, gears, and screws, evidence of Grandpa's penchant for tinkering with anything mechanical. Every piece seemed to hold a fragment of his spirit, a lingering presence that made the author's skin prickle with an inexplicable chill. In a corner, half buried under heaps of other forgotten items, lay a collection of hats. Once vibrant and full of life, they were now mere shadows of their former selves, riddled with moth holes and emanating a faint, unpleasant odor. These hats, which had once adorned heads during countless seasons and events, now seemed to silently mourn their own decay. Nearby, broken machinery stood like silent sentinels, their rusted innards exposed, evoking a sense of desolation and abandonment. The sight of these once functional devices, now reduced to useless scrap, filled the author with an eerie sense of unease, as if the machines themselves were lamenting their long-forgotten purpose. In the shadowy depths of the storeroom, the author stumbled upon a large, dust-covered box labeled with their older brother's name. Anticipation quickened their heartbeat as they pried open the lid, hoping to unearth something valuable or nostalgic. Instead, the box revealed a disheartening array of seemingly worthless items. Old notebooks with pages yellowed and curling at the edges, broken toys that once brought joy, and crumpled pieces of paper littered the bottom. Each item seemed to mock the author's expectations, and a sense of foreboding grew with every piece of trash that emerged from the box. It was as if the box held not just discarded items, but the fragments of forgotten dreams and lost time. Further exploration led to the discovery of a plastic container tucked away in a forgotten corner. Its once transparent sides were now clouded with grime, yet the contents inside were intriguingly pristine. Inside, around 100 DVD discs lay neatly stacked. At first glance, they appeared clean and well-preserved, but a closer inspection revealed something unsettling. The reflective surfaces of the discs were marred by strange circular lines, as if etched by an unseen hand. The author felt a shiver run down their spine as they held one up to the dim light, the concentric patterns seeming almost purposeful, as if marking each disc with a hidden, sinister message. Each DVD felt heavier than its physical weight, imbued with a sense of ominous mystery. The circular scratches evoked thoughts of dark rituals or a hidden code meant to ward off intruders. Handling them brought an unshakable feeling of dread, as if these discs were never meant to be found, let alone played. The author couldn't help but wonder about the origins of these marks and what secrets the DVDs might hold, buried in their damaged, reflective surfaces. The storeroom, once a mere repository of old junk, now felt like a crypt, guarding the eerie remnants of the past. Driven by an insatiable curiosity and a growing sense of unease, the author decided to uncover the mysteries hidden within the marked DVD discs. The first step was acquiring a DVD drive, a relic in its own right, from a local electronics store. The clerk seemed to eye the author with a strange mix of pity and curiosity as the purchase was made. Clutching the small box, the author hurried home, the anticipation mingling with dread. What secrets lay encoded on those eerily marked discs? With the DVD drive set up, the author inserted the first disc, heart pounding. The computer whirred to life, and the screen flickered before displaying a series of video files. Each file was about 30 minutes long and named only with cryptic symbols and numbers. The author selected the first file and hit play. The video quality was poor, grainy, and distorted, as if filmed with an old, malfunctioning camera. The content, however, was far more disturbing than the low resolution. The videos depicted mundane settings: an empty room, A deserted playground, a silent forest, but each scene was imbued with a sense of profound unease. There were no people, only the unsettling sound of static and occasional, inexplicable noises, a distant whisper, the creak of a door, the flutter of wings. As the author watched, a pattern began to emerge. Each video seemed to be filmed from a hidden perspective, as if someone or something was observing these places secretly. The silence and stillness were oppressive, creating a haunting atmosphere that made the hair on the back of the author's neck stand up. The worst part was the feeling that something was always just out of sight, lurking in the shadows or around the corner, never fully revealing itself. Determined to uncover the purpose behind these bizarre recordings, the author continued to watch, disc after disc. With each video, the sense of dread grew. It felt as if the observer was drawing closer, the scenes becoming more personal and invasive. The final video, the most chilling of all, showed a darkened hallway that looked disturbingly familiar. As the camera panned slowly, the author realized with a jolt of terror that it was the hallway leading to their own storeroom. The screen went black, leaving the author staring at their reflection, now pale and wide-eyed, in the blank monitor. The storeroom, once a repository of forgotten memories, had transformed into a gateway to an unsettling reality, its secrets finally revealed, but far from understood. With trembling hands, the author inserted the first disc and clicked on the video file. The screen flickered to life, revealing a poorly lit room. At its center sat a man with an enormous belly, his skin stretched taut and adorned with grotesque, nonsensical tattoos. He wore a dingy tank top, and his eyes seemed vacant, almost lifeless. The man was seated at a table overflowing with food, shoveling it into his mouth with a disturbing fervor. The camera's focus was uncomfortably close, capturing every greasy morsel as it disappeared into the man's gaping maw. His chewing was loud, almost amplified, each bite a grotesque symphony of gluttony. At one point he paused, his greasy fingers fumbling at his face. With a casual flick, he peeled off his mustache, revealing it to be a cheap, fake prop. The act was unsettling, as if he were shedding a part of his identity. Despite the removal of the mustache, the man continued eating without pause. His eyes occasionally darted to the camera, but there was no recognition, no awareness, only a mechanical, insatiable hunger. The scene played out for what felt like an eternity, each passing second dragging the viewer deeper into a surreal nightmare of excess and grotesque indulgence. Shaken but determined, the author moved on to the second disc. This video opened with a shot of a filthy alleyway, the kind one might avoid on a dark night. A man, dressed in tattered clothes and exuding a palpable air of destitution, staggered into view. His movements were exaggerated, almost theatrical, as he rummaged through the trash bins with deliberate clumsiness. As he dug through the garbage, bizarre sound effects began to overlay the scene. The rustling of trash was accompanied by cartoonish booings and honks, creating a jarring dissonance. The most unsettling aspect was the laughter. It wasn't the hearty, genuine laughter of an amused audience, but a distorted, mocking cackle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The man, though dressed as a homeless person, seemed out of place, as if playing a role in a twisted performance. His actions were too deliberate, too staged. At moments he would glance at the camera, his eyes reflecting a fleeting moment of clarity and desperation, before resuming his exaggerated scavenging. The laugh track continued, growing more distorted and sinister, as if the unseen audience was delighting in some cruel joke at the man's expense. The video ended abruptly, leaving the author with a deep sense of unease. The contrast between the staged absurdity and the underlying horror of the scenes created a surreal, nightmarish experience. The storeroom's contents were revealing themselves to be not just forgotten relics, but a portal into a dark, twisted reality that defied understanding. The author felt a creeping dread, knowing there were still more discs to uncover, each promising further descent into this bizarre and terrifying world. Reluctantly, the author inserted the third disc, bracing for whatever bizarre content awaited. The video began with a bald man astride a tiny pink children's bicycle in an abandoned lot. The man, clearly too large for the bike, wobbled unsteadily before crashing to the ground. Each fall was accompanied by an exaggerated splatter of red paint, mimicking blood. The paint dripped from his head and limbs, creating a gruesome image against his pale skin. The camera captured each agonizing detail as he struggled to right himself, only to fall again. The repetitive crashes became a macabre spectacle, each more horrific than the last. The man's expression remained eerily blank, as if he were a puppet in some grotesque performance. Hesitant but determined, the author played the fourth disc. The video revealed the same bald man in a dimly lit room. In his hand, he held a syringe filled with bright red paint. The author watched in horrified fascination as the man injected the paint into his arm, his face contorted in pain. The scene shifted to him filling another syringe with a clear liquid, a household cleaner, which he then injected into his other arm. His body convulsed slightly, the substances taking their toll as the walls seemed to pulsate with a sickly hue. Finally, the author inserted the fifth disc. The video showed the man in a makeshift gym, poorly lit and filled with eerie shadows. His muscles, swollen and discolored from injections, glistened with sweat. He flexed grotesquely, veins bulging, the display both a testament to his physical strength and a horrifying showcase of self-destruction. As he lifted weights, his vacant expression remained, the air thick with the smell of sweat and chemicals. The room vibrated with an unseen tension, distorted cheers and muffled groans accompanying each lift. The man's body, pushed beyond its limits, seemed on the verge of collapse, yet he continued, driven by an inexplicable, self-destructive urge. The author, trembling, watched as the final video ended. The storeroom's secrets were revealed, exposing a disturbing narrative of pain, obsession, and madness. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the act of watching had summoned something dark from the depths of those forgotten discs. The author's life had irrevocably changed, haunted by the macabre images and unanswered questions left by the storeroom's horrific treasures. The author, now deeply unsettled, proceeded to the next disc, hoping to find something that would make sense of the preceding horrors. The screen flickered to life, revealing a video that introduced a skeletal man with emaciated limbs. His appearance was almost grotesque, resembling a human skeleton more than a living person. Despite his thin, frail form, he portrayed himself as a powerful bodybuilder, his muscles exaggerated for theatrical effect. In this disturbing display, the man approached a set of enormous locomotive wheels, massive metal components that seemed impossibly heavy. He gripped the wheels with surprising ease, lifting them effortlessly as if they were mere toys. His gaunt frame did not betray any hint of the extraordinary strength he displayed. He maneuvered the wheels with a casual grace, performing feats that defied all logical explanation. The author was struck dumb with shock and disbelief. The man's skeletal appearance was at odds with his incredible strength, a stark contradiction that left the viewer questioning reality. The video captured every detail: the man's skeletal fingers curling around the heavy wheels, lifting them high above his head and setting them down with a nonchalant ease. Determined to verify the authenticity, the author replayed the footage, scrutinizing every frame for any sign of trickery. The wheels were real, massive, heavy, and unmistakable in their solidity. The man's effortless handling of them only deepened the mystery. No props or special effects were visible. The strength displayed was undeniable and terrifyingly real. Even after multiple viewings and attempts to rationalize what was seen, the author remained bewildered. The man's skeletal form and his feat of strength created a chilling paradox, leaving a lingering sense of dread. The video concluded, but the unsettling images of the man's impossible strength and skeletal appearance continued to haunt the author, cementing the storeroom's contents as a dark and inexplicable enigma. At first, the author dismissed the video as a possible fake or elaborate edit. The sight of the skeletal man lifting enormous locomotive wheels seemed too incredible to be true. However, the realistic sounds of the heavy wheels clanking and the man's strained breaths lent an unsettling authenticity to the footage. The heavy thuds and the man's physical strain made it clear that this was not mere trickery or special effects. Replaying the video and scrutinizing every detail only deepened the author's unease. The realism of the sounds and the man's effortless handling of the heavy wheels defied logical explanation, leaving the author with a chilling sense of disbelief and horror. The author continued with the remaining discs, each revealing increasingly bizarre scenes. One video showed a bald man surrounded by a writhing mass of snakes. The unnatural harmony between the man and the snakes created a disturbing atmosphere, as if the reptiles were almost part of some dark ritual. Another video featured people dressed as teachers engaging in surreal, almost ritualistic classroom activities. Their exaggerated and bizarre actions, coupled with their unnerving expressions, added to the sense of dread. In a different video, absurd situations unfolded involving bosses or authority figures. One manager was seen engaging in nonsensical beratings, his face contorting grotesquely. The scenes shifted to absurd scenarios, such as authority figures balancing on stacks of office chairs or participating in bizarre, mock ceremonies. Each video presented unsettling and surreal imagery, contributing to a pervasive sense of dread. The storeroom's contents revealed a nightmarish world where reality was distorted beyond recognition, leaving the author haunted by the disturbing and inexplicable nature of what they had uncovered. As the author delved deeper into the remaining discs, the videos revealed increasingly absurd and inexplicable scenes. One video showed a man scavenging through a dumpster and drinking a mysterious liquid from a bottle he found there. His unshakable calm as he consumed the questionable substance was deeply unsettling. The camera focused on his face as he drank, his expression eerily serene despite the disturbing nature of his actions. Another video featured an individual struggling to draw a simple triangle on a wall, while an old tape recorder played in the background. The man's attempts were chaotic and comically inept, punctuated by erratic beats from the tape recorder's antenna being struck. The sound of the antenna banging against the recorder created a jarring, dissonant soundtrack that intensified the scene's bizarre quality. Each failed attempt was accompanied by more frantic banging and incoherent mutterings, contributing to an atmosphere of disorienting madness. The author, feeling increasingly troubled by the videos, decided to reach out to his brother for insights into the strange collection. He composed a detailed email describing the unsettling content he had discovered and expressing his growing concern. Given the nature of the videos, he hoped his brother might shed some light on their origin or offer a plausible explanation. Days passed without a response. The lack of communication grew more alarming as time went on. The author's anxiety mounted, sensing that something was seriously wrong. The silence was unnerving, heightening his unease about the videos and their origins. Unable to shake the feeling of dread, the author considered contacting authorities or seeking professional help. The videos had already disturbed him deeply, and his brother's lack of response only compounded his fears. The haunting nature of the footage and the mysterious silence from his brother left him with a chilling sense of impending doom, as if the answers he sought were far darker and more troubling than he could have imagined. Desperate for some clarity and support, the author decided to share the disturbing videos with a close friend. He hoped that discussing the content might help demystify the unsettling footage or at least provide some comfort. As they watched together, the friend's reaction mirrored the author's horror. The friend was particularly disturbed by one video where a man, his face painted with crude, makeshift stubble, chased two bald men wielding an axe. In this nightmarish scene, the man's frenzied pursuit was both absurd and terrifying. The camera followed him as he ran through a dimly lit, decrepit building, the shadows elongating with each erratic swing of the axe. The bald men, seemingly trapped and panicked, darted around in a futile attempt to escape. The unsettling juxtaposition of the man's ridiculous appearance and the violent chase created an atmosphere of deep discomfort. The friend's face grew pale as he watched, clearly shaken by the surreal and disturbing imagery. In a bid to understand more about the videos and their origins, the author turned to the internet. His search led him to Reddit, where he scoured various forums and threads dedicated to creepy stories and unsettling phenomena. He came across a thread that seemed similar to his situation, featuring accounts of bizarre and disturbing videos. The Reddit post described videos with surreal and horrifying content, much like what the author had seen. However, the specifics of the content differed, ranging from strange rituals to inexplicable, eerie occurrences. None of the videos matched the exact scenes from the storeroom collection, but the eerie similarities in the nature of the content confirmed that the disturbing trend was not isolated. Despite this finding, the information provided no real answers or explanations about the videos in the author's collection. The thread, while unsettling, did not offer any clues as to the origin or purpose of the videos. The sense of mystery only deepened, leaving the author with more questions than answers. The search for understanding seemed to lead only to darker, more unsettling corners of the internet, further fueling his growing sense of dread and confusion. One day, while walking past a dumpster, the author spotted a cardboard box partially hidden among the refuse. The box was filled with discs, similar to those that had haunted his recent discovery. Overwhelmed by a mix of curiosity and apprehension, he moved to retrieve the box, but before he could act, a passerby grabbed it and walked away. The sight left him unsettled and yearning for answers. Later that day, the author experienced another unsettling encounter. He crossed paths with a homeless man who bore a striking resemblance to one of the figures from the videos. The man's disheveled appearance and vacant expression mirrored those seen in the disturbing footage, and the eerie coincidence left the author feeling increasingly unnerved. The homeless man seemed to recognize him, or at least reacted to his presence with a strange, unsettling awareness. The brief, inexplicable interaction only deepened the author's sense of dread and confusion. As the author continued to grapple with his mounting fears, he overheard a conversation among a group of homeless individuals huddled near a street corner. The topic of their discussion was grim and shocking. They spoke of a recent death among their own, a man who had succumbed to poisoning from a mysterious liquid found in the trash. The details were chillingly familiar. The liquid described was strikingly similar to the kind consumed by the man in one of the videos. The author's mind raced, connecting the dots between the disturbing content of the videos and the unsettling reality unfolding around him. Was there a sinister link between the footage and the real-life incidents? Despite the growing evidence that suggested a horrifying connection, the author continued to hold out hope for a response from his brother. He sent another urgent message, pleading for any information or insight that might clarify the situation. His desperation to understand the connection between the videos, the homeless man's appearance, and the tragic death only intensified his anxiety. The horror seemed to seep into his everyday life, intertwining the disturbing content of the videos with an increasingly ominous reality. The author returned home with the mysterious box of discs, a sense of unease gripping him. He placed the box on his kitchen table, its worn exterior hinting at its long-forgotten past. The box was filled with a jumble of unlabeled discs, each one seemingly just as enigmatic as the last. Despite his mounting curiosity, he hesitated to open the box. The unsettling experiences with the previous set of videos had left him anxious and apprehensive about what might await him inside. He knew that diving into the box could uncover more disturbing content, but the allure of uncovering more about this bizarre collection was too strong. The box sat in his home, a dark promise of secrets yet to be revealed. Determined to make sense of his disturbing discoveries, the author turned to the internet for clues. His mind was fixated on a single word, the only fragment of a clue he had from the recent videos. He hoped that a search might yield some answers, or at least offer a hint about the nature of the content he had uncovered. To his dismay, the search results were largely unhelpful. The term Zemi led him to a series of melodramatic articles and soap opera plot summaries, completely unrelated to his situation. There were countless links to romantic dramas and lifestyle blogs, each page more mundane than the last. The stark contrast between what he was searching for and what he found left him deeply puzzled. The internet, which he had hoped would provide some semblance of clarity, instead offered him nothing but banal distractions. His frustration grew as he scrolled through irrelevant content, feeling increasingly isolated and confused. The sense of dread he felt about the contents of the box only intensified as he was unable to find any connection or explanation online. The search results, which seemed to mock his efforts, left him with a sense of foreboding, as if the answers he sought were deliberately hidden from view. The author's unease intensified when he encountered a massive new employee at work. The man's size and strength were unnerving, and he bore a striking resemblance to characters from the disturbing videos. His bulk and unnatural strength immediately evoked fear in the author, who struggled to stay calm. The encounter felt like an ominous confirmation of the nightmares he had been grappling with, intensifying his anxiety and dread. The author's growing terror led him to investigate further, linking the disturbing videos to a series of strange deaths in real life. He discovered that the deaths bore unsettling similarities to scenes from the videos. One victim was poisoned by a mysterious liquid reminiscent of the liquid consumed in the videos, while another death mirrored the absurd and violent scenarios depicted on the discs. This chilling connection suggested that the horrors portrayed in the videos were not mere fiction but were somehow related to these real-world tragedies. The realization that his own life might be intertwined with these macabre events deepened his sense of terror, making him feel as though he was uncovering a dark and dangerous reality that threatened his safety and sanity. Driven by an escalating sense of dread and a desperate need for answers, the author decided to reach out to the seller of similar discs. He scoured online forums and obscure websites, eventually locating a contact who was reputed to sell the same unsettling videos. With a mix of hope and trepidation, he sent a message outlining his disturbing experiences and asking for any information about the origins and nature of the discs. The response he received was cryptic and unnerving. The seller's reply was brief and evasive, offering little in the way of clarity. The message hinted at the nature of the discs being beyond ordinary comprehension, suggesting that the videos were part of a larger, more sinister narrative. It also included a warning about the dangers of delving too deeply into such matters. The ambiguity of the response only deepened the author's fear, leaving him with more questions than answers. As the author continued his investigation, he began noticing a disturbing trend. A growing number of homeless individuals appeared in new, pristine clothing, an oddity in itself. These individuals behaved strangely, their movements were unnaturally stiff, and their interactions with others seemed off. They often stared blankly, avoiding eye contact, and their conversations lacked coherence, further adding to their unsettling presence. The author's growing suspicion was further fueled by the realization that these individuals, despite their new clothes, seemed to have an eerie, almost mechanical quality about them. It was as if they were part of an elaborate masquerade, and their unnatural behavior felt deeply unsettling. Each encounter with these suspicious figures heightened his sense of fear and paranoia, as he began to wonder if there was a more sinister connection between them and the disturbing videos he had discovered. The presence of these strange, newly dressed homeless people created a chilling atmosphere, making the author question whether the bizarre elements of the videos were seeping into reality. The unsettling nature of these encounters only added to the growing sense of dread and urgency, as he struggled to understand the full extent of the dark forces at play. The author received a reply from the disc seller, which added another layer of chilling intrigue to the mystery. The seller revealed that the disturbing discs once belonged to his brother, who was now imprisoned. The message offered few details but suggested that the content of the discs had a dark history, with the seller hinting at the brother's criminal activities being somehow connected to the videos. The response was unsettling in its brevity and the implications it carried. It became clear that the discs were part of a sinister legacy, involving criminal elements and dark secrets. The mention of imprisonment added a new dimension to the mystery, implying that the brother's activities might have extended far beyond mere video recordings. The author was left with a deepening sense of dread, questioning the true nature of the videos and the potential danger lurking behind them. The author's unease grew when he discovered a familiar face among the disturbing footage. On one of the discs, he saw a video featuring a man who looked strikingly like his former high school physical education teacher. The sight was both shocking and horrifying, as the video depicted the teacher in a bizarre and unsettling situation. The physical education teacher, who had always seemed ordinary and unremarkable, was now shown in a surreal and disturbing light. In the video, he was engaged in strange rituals and appeared in an eerie setting, which starkly contrasted with his known persona. This revelation intensified the author's suspicions that the videos were more than just isolated oddities. The recognition of someone from his past in such a grotesque context further solidified his fears that the disturbing footage was linked to a deeper, more sinister reality. This discovery left the author reeling, as the boundary between his past and the nightmarish content of the videos seemed to blur. The presence of someone he knew among the disturbing footage made the situation all the more personal and terrifying. As he pieced together the connections, the horror of the videos and the implications of their content grew ever more ominous. As the author made his way home one evening, he was confronted by a disturbing sight. A group of people was loitering near his apartment building, and they all bore an unsettling resemblance to each other. Each individual had an enormous, distended belly and was adorned with bizarre, grotesque tattoos that seemed almost otherworldly. The tattoos were intricate and disturbing, featuring twisted symbols and dark imagery that seemed to shift and writhe in the dim light. The uniformity in their appearance and their unnerving, vacant expressions created an atmosphere of palpable dread. Their presence felt almost like a manifestation of the nightmarish scenarios depicted in the videos. The author's skin crawled as he realized the chilling similarity between these people and the grotesque characters he had seen in the footage. He hurried past them, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that their gaze followed him with a cold, almost predatory curiosity. The author's sense of horror intensified as he began to notice a disturbing trend. It seemed that the number of these strange individuals, whom he began to refer to as shifters, was steadily increasing around him. Their presence was becoming alarmingly common, appearing in various public spaces and even in his local neighborhood. These shifters, with their grotesque features and unsettling behavior, seemed to be encroaching on his everyday life. The more he encountered them, the more his anxiety and fear mounted. The shifters' unnerving resemblance to the characters in the videos and their increasing numbers created a pervasive sense of dread. The author found himself increasingly paranoid, fearing that these disturbing figures might be a harbinger of something far more sinister. His psychological well-being was under strain, as the line between his reality and the nightmare of the videos began to blur. The growing presence of these shifters and their menacing similarity to the video's characters caused a profound sense of unease. The author felt as though his grip on reality was slipping, with the nightmare seeping into every facet of his life. The more he saw them, the more he questioned his sanity, struggling to reconcile the eerie coincidences with the frightening reality that was unfolding around him. One evening, as the author was rummaging through his attic, he stumbled upon yet another box filled with discs, similar to the ones that had already unsettled him. This box, though dusty and worn, seemed to hold a dark promise of more disturbing content. He hesitated to open it immediately, the memory of the previous video's horrifying imagery still fresh in his mind. The thought of potentially uncovering more of the grotesque and surreal footage was both compelling and terrifying. After some deliberation, he left the box unopened, feeling a mix of dread and reluctant curiosity. The box sat in the corner of his room, a foreboding presence that loomed over him, as he debated whether he was ready to confront whatever might lie within. The anticipation of what new horrors might await him inside added to his growing sense of unease. In his quest for understanding, the author decided to investigate the cryptic word "zame" that had appeared in connection with the disturbing videos. He conducted an online search, hoping to uncover its meaning or significance. However, his search results were a mixture of articles and films unrelated to his situation. The term led him to references in various media and obscure old slang, but none of the results provided a clear explanation. The lack of concrete information left him puzzled. The word "zemi" seemed to be elusive, slipping through the cracks of ordinary understanding. The articles and movies he found were tangentially related, but none offered the insight he was seeking. He began to suspect that "zemi" might be an archaic or esoteric term, possibly linked to an old form of slang or an obscure cultural reference. The frustration of not finding a definitive answer only added to his growing anxiety. The word's mysterious nature felt like a key to unlocking the sinister secrets behind the videos, yet it remained frustratingly out of reach. This ongoing enigma heightened his sense of dread, as he felt that the answers he sought were deliberately hidden, deepening the darkness that had begun to encroach upon his reality. While working on a construction site, the author encountered a figure that sent a chill down his spine. A massive, bald man, whose imposing presence bore an unsettling resemblance to the powerlifter from the disturbing videos, was on site. The man's sheer size and muscular build were reminiscent of the grotesque characters the author had seen before. His presence was accompanied by an aura of intimidation and power that seemed almost unreal. The sight of this giant strongman was more than just disquieting, it was deeply terrifying. The man's appearance and mannerisms were so closely aligned with those in the videos that it felt as if the nightmarish scenes had somehow bled into reality. The author's heart raced as he tried to make sense of this unnerving encounter, wondering if there was a sinister connection between this man and the disturbing footage that had haunted him. As days passed, the author became increasingly aware of a troubling pattern. He noticed that people featured in the videos were dying under mysterious and grisly circumstances. This grim realization became more alarming when he spotted black trash bags discarded on the streets, seemingly at random. The sight of these bags, which appeared almost deliberately placed, was deeply unsettling. The black bags were strikingly similar to those seen in the videos, where they were often linked to death and decay. The author began to connect these bags to the eerie deaths he had been observing. The more he saw these bags, the more he began to associate them with the grim fate that had befallen the individuals in the videos. It was as if the bags were symbolic markers of a deeper, more sinister plot, signaling the presence of a malevolent force at work. This connection between the black bags and the deaths only deepened his sense of horror. Each encounter with these bags felt like a dark omen, as if the boundary between the videos and real life was dissolving. The presence of these ominous symbols in his everyday environment heightened his fear, making him feel trapped in a nightmarish reality that seemed to be expanding with every passing day. The author's sense of dread intensified as he began noticing a disturbing trend in his surroundings. Homeless individuals, who had previously appeared in ragged clothing, were now seen wearing brand new outfits. Their appearance alone was unsettling, but their behavior was even more bizarre. These individuals exhibited strange and unnatural conduct, moving with odd, jerky motions and speaking in disjointed, incoherent sentences. Their vacant stares and disconcerting mannerisms seemed almost robotic. The author's paranoia reached new heights when he encountered a group of 8 men on the street, all displaying the same eerie characteristics. They were all dressed in new clothes, similar to those worn by the previously observed homeless individuals. Each man had the same unnerving appearance, a vacant look in their eyes, and their movements were oddly synchronized. This disturbing similarity and their unsettling behavior made it feel as if he was surrounded by a faceless, malevolent presence. The terror deepened when the author faced a series of alarming incidents at work and in the city. On the construction site, a worker tragically died under mysterious circumstances. The author couldn't shake the feeling that the death might have been caused by the intervention of one of the unsettling shifters, those individuals whose presence had become increasingly pervasive and menacing. The threat of the shifters was further underscored during a near accident in the city. The author was almost struck by a motorcycle, only to realize that the rider was another shifter. The motorcyclist's features matched those of the unsettling individuals he had encountered before, the same vacant expression and unnervingly smooth movements. The close call with the shifter heightened his fear, as it seemed clear that these entities were not just isolated incidents, but part of a larger, ominous pattern. The convergence of these unsettling events, strange deaths, eerie behavior of the homeless, and encounters with shifters created a nightmarish reality that the author could barely comprehend. The boundary between the macabre world of the videos and his daily life seemed to erode, leaving him with an ever-deepening sense of horror and vulnerability. The author's growing paranoia was amplified by an unsettling change in his television programming. What had once been ordinary channels and familiar shows gradually transformed into a bizarre and unsettling assortment of art house films. These films, featuring an unnerving number of bald actors, seemed to mimic the disturbing imagery and themes from the videos he had discovered. The actors' eerily vacant expressions and the disjointed, surreal content of the films were deeply unsettling. Each night, the television seemed to broadcast increasingly bizarre and horrifying scenes. The once familiar broadcasts had devolved into a disturbing parade of art house cinema, filled with abstract and often grotesque imagery. The plots, if they could be called that, were incoherent and deeply unsettling, mirroring the unsettling scenarios depicted in the videos. The constant barrage of these unsettling films felt like a nightmarish reflection of the terror that had been encroaching on his life. Just when the author thought things couldn't get any worse, he received a chilling reply from his brother, the seller of the disturbing discs. The message was terse and threatening, clearly enraged by the author's meddling with the videos. The brother warned him to stop his investigations or face dire consequences. The tone of the message was menacing, hinting at a dark and dangerous side to his brother's involvement with the discs. Despite the threatening nature of the response, the author couldn't help but feel a sense of unease about the legitimacy of the threat. The brother's ability to reach him and enact any form of retribution seemed uncertain. Nonetheless, the threat added an extra layer of fear and urgency to the already chilling situation. The author was left grappling with the grim possibility that his curiosity might have provoked a dangerous force, unsure if his brother's threat was merely a bluff or a genuine danger. The combination of the nightmarish television programming and the menacing threat from his brother created a deeply unsettling atmosphere. The boundaries between reality and the disturbing imagery from the videos seemed to blur even further, leaving the author in a state of heightened fear and confusion. One night, the author experienced a chilling encounter that seemed straight out of a nightmare. Looking out of his apartment window, he was horrified to see a crowd of shifters gathered below. These figures, with their unsettlingly vacant stares and uniform, eerie appearances, were staring directly up at him. Their presence was unnerving. Their eyes seemed to follow his every movement with an intensity that was both menacing and deeply disconcerting. The shifters' behavior was aggressively confrontational. They began to gesture and move in a coordinated manner, creating a sense of ominous intent. The collective gaze and the hostile actions of the crowd made it clear that they were not just passive observers but active participants in a disturbing game. The author felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if he was being hunted or scrutinized by a force beyond his understanding. The sight of these figures gathered in such a menacing way left him with a profound sense of vulnerability and fear. Adding to his growing terror, the author noticed a disturbing change in the content of the discs. The new videos were shorter but far more disturbing. Each clip featured unsettling scenes that seemed to document the shifters' activities in more detail. The videos depicted these beings in increasingly disturbing scenarios, replacing ordinary people with their grotesque counterparts. In these new recordings, the shifters were shown engaging in bizarre and unsettling activities that suggested a disturbing trend of replacing normal individuals with their nightmarish counterparts. The scenes were fraught with an intense sense of dread, as the shifters appeared to be infiltrating and corrupting every aspect of normal life. The short, fragmented nature of the videos only added to the disorienting effect, making the disturbing imagery feel even more immediate and jarring. The transformation of the videos into grotesque portrayals of the shifters' encroachment into everyday life only heightened the author's sense of dread. The line between the surreal horror of the videos and his own reality seemed to be blurring, leaving him with an ever-deepening sense of terror and paranoia. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting a pale glow across the room. The protagonist lay in bed, cocooned in blankets. The calm was almost unsettling. Suddenly the door creaked open, and his mother's silhouette appeared. In time to get up, she called softly, her voice lingering in the air. "Breakfast is ready." He groaned, burying his face deeper into the pillow. The bed felt like a sanctuary. His mother's steps grew louder as she approached, her presence imposing. She stood by the bed, her shadow looming over him. "Get up now," she said, her tone firmer. He could feel her eyes on him. With a reluctant sigh, he sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The room felt colder, a chill creeping into his bones. "Okay, I'm up," he muttered, swinging his legs over the side. His mother nodded, a tight-lipped smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. She turned and walked out, leaving the door ajar. He shivered, not from the cold, but from a strange sense of unease. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. His father sat at the table, reading the newspaper, while his mother busied herself at the stove. The protagonist took his seat, the wooden chair creaking. The breakfast spread was inviting, but the atmosphere was tense. "Good morning," his father said, not looking up. His voice was gruff, tinged with weariness. "Morning," he replied, reaching for toast. He noticed his mother's movements were stiff, her back rigid as she placed eggs on the table. She sat down, her eyes flickering nervously. "We haven't seen your aunt in a while," his father said suddenly. The protagonist's heart skipped a beat. There was something about his mother's sister they never spoke about openly. His mother's face paled, her hand gripping the edge of the table. "She's busy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Busy," his father scoffed, finally looking up. "Or is she avoiding us? There are things we need to discuss, things that can't be ignored." A heavy silence fell over the table. The protagonist could feel the tension crackling like static. His mother's eyes were wide, her knuckles white. "Not now," she said, her voice trembling. "We can't talk about this now." His father's expression darkened, but he said nothing more. The room felt colder. The protagonist's appetite vanished, replaced by a gnawing dread. As they sat in silence, the shadows seemed to grow longer. The breakfast table, once a place of warmth, now felt like a battleground, where unspoken horrors lurked in every corner. Breakfast was tense. His father broke the silence with a harsh comment. "Your relatives are all crazy," he said, snapping the newspaper shut, every last one of them. His mother stiffened, anger flashing in her eyes. "That's not true," she replied, her voice trembling. "They're just different." "Different," his father sneered. "They're delusional. They talk about things that don't make sense." His mother's face paled. "You don't understand them. You've never tried." "Why should I?" his father retorted. "Every time we're around them, something goes wrong. They're a bad influence, and I don't want them near our son." The argument escalated. The protagonist watched, feeling the tension squeeze his chest. His mother's eyes were wild with a mix of fear and anger. "You don't know what you're talking about," she shouted. "They're my family." "They are dangerous," his father shot back. "And the sooner you realize that, the better." The protagonist's mind raced, piecing together fragments of past conversations. There was always a shadow over mentions of his mother's family, an unspoken horror. Later, the protagonist was supposed to attend a family event. Dreading it, he needed a way out. An idea formed. "Mama, my stomach hurts," he said, clutching his abdomen, trying to look pitiful. His mother's concern was immediate. She knelt beside him. "Are you okay? When did it start?" "Just now," he lied, grimacing. "It really hurts." She looked worried. "Do you think you can make it to the event? We can leave early if it gets worse." He shook his head. "I don't think I can. It hurts too much." She sighed, glancing at the clock. "Okay, we won't go. But if it doesn't get better, we might need to see a doctor." Relief washed over him, mixed with guilt. He nodded, curling up on the couch. "Thank you, Mama." She patted his back. "Just rest. I'll make you some tea." As she walked away, the protagonist's relief was overshadowed by a creeping dread. The argument from the morning echoed in his mind. His father's words about his mother's family, the shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in the corners of the room. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and his stomach twisted with a real, growing fear. The car ride to the registry office was tense. The protagonist's parents continued their argument from breakfast, their voices a constant barrage of anger and frustration. He sat in the back seat, headphones on, trying to drown out their words with music. The melodies did little to ease the unease that had settled in his stomach. "Just get through this, and we'll leave right after the registration," his father promised, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. His mother's face was set in a grim mask, her knuckles white, as she gripped the steering wheel. The protagonist nodded, the sense of dread growing stronger with each passing mile. Upon arriving at the registry office, the family stepped out of the car and walked towards the building. The protagonist's eyes were drawn to the bride, who stood near the entrance in a plain blue dress that looked out of place for such a special day. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around as if expecting something to go wrong. The guests, scattered around the courtyard, wore expressions of discomfort and unease. Inside, the atmosphere was no better. The room was dimly lit, and the air felt heavy. The protagonist's father whispered to his mother, "We'll leave right after the ceremony." The ceremony itself was brief and joyless. The bride and groom exchanged vows with little enthusiasm, their voices barely audible. The guests watched with a mix of pity and apprehension. The protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Shadows seemed to flicker in the corners of the room, and a chill ran down his spine. As the officiant pronounced the couple married, the protagonist's father nudged his mother. "Let's go," he said, his voice low and urgent. The family quickly made their way back to the car. As they drove away, the protagonist glanced back at the registry office. The bride stood alone, her blue dress fluttering in the breeze, her eyes hollow and haunted. The sense of dread that had been building all day now felt almost overwhelming. He turned away, trying to focus on the road ahead, but the image of the bride's forlorn figure stayed with him, a haunting reminder of the day's strange events. While waiting for the registration to begin, the protagonist wandered around the courtyard. He spotted a girl his age sitting on a bench, staring blankly at the ground. Feeling curious and a bit bored, he approached her. "Hi, I'm Alex," he said, offering a hesitant smile. The girl looked up, her eyes a striking shade of blue that seemed almost otherworldly. "Hi, I'm Nadia," she replied softly. They fell into an easy conversation. Nadia had an air of sadness about her, which intrigued Alex. "Do you come to these things often?" he asked, trying to lighten the mood. Nadia shook her head. "Not really. My family doesn't celebrate much. No birthdays, no New Year's. We don't believe in it." Alex frowned. "Why not?" Nadia shrugged. "It's just how things are. They say it's better not to attract attention." The conversation left Alex with a strange feeling. There was something off about Nadia's words, something that made his skin prickle. He glanced around, noticing the shadows seemed darker, the air colder. The registration concluded, and true to his word, Alex's father was eager to leave. They hurried back to the car, ready to drive away from the unsettling atmosphere. However, the bride's mother intercepted them, insisting that Alex's mother say goodbye properly. "Just a few minutes," she said, pulling Alex's mother back towards the building. "Wait here," Alex's mother told him and his father. "I'll be right back." Alex and his father sat in the car, the engine idling. The silence was thick, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. Alex glanced at his father, who drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Then it stretched into what felt like hours. Alex's unease grew. The courtyard outside seemed even darker, the shadows creeping closer. He thought about Nadia and her strange words, about the joyless wedding and the uneasy guests. His mind raced with questions. Finally, Alex's father sighed. "Stay here. I'll go check on your mother." As his father stepped out of the car, Alex felt a chill run down his spine. He watched his father disappear into the building, leaving him alone. The car's interior felt claustrophobic, the air stifling. He fiddled with his headphones, but even the music couldn't drown out his growing anxiety. Suddenly, he saw movement in the courtyard. Nadia stood there, staring at him with those haunting blue eyes. She raised a hand, beckoning him to come outside. Alex hesitated, his heart pounding. Something in her gaze was both compelling and terrifying. Unable to resist, he opened the car door and stepped out. The air outside was colder than before, the shadows deeper. He approached Nadia slowly, his breath visible in the chilly air. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice trembling. Nadia looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "They're coming." Before Alex could ask what she meant, a loud scream echoed from the building. His blood ran cold as he turned towards the sound. Nadia grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You need to leave," now she urged, her voice urgent. Panic surged through Alex. He broke free from Nadia's grip and ran towards the building, calling for his parents. The door swung open, and he stumbled inside, only to be greeted by an eerie silence. The dim light flickered, casting long, sinister shadows on the walls. He found his parents in the hallway, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. "We need to go," his father said, his voice shaking. They rushed back to the car, Alex casting one last glance at Nadia. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, her figure barely visible in the darkness. Her eyes, those unnerving blue eyes, were the last thing he saw before they sped away, leaving the registry office and its haunting memories behind. Alex and his father waited in the car, the minutes dragging by like hours. The air felt thick with tension, the eerie silence pressing down on them. His father's patience wore thin. With a frustrated sigh, he turned off the engine and got out. "Stay here," he told Alex. "I'm going to find your mother." Alex watched his father disappear into the building. He sat alone in the car, the darkness outside seeming to close in around him. The courtyard felt deserted, the shadows growing longer as evening approached. The unsettling feeling from earlier intensified. Time crawled by, each second stretching into an eternity. Finally, his parents emerged from the building, their faces pale and strained. His mother's eyes were wide with an emotion Alex couldn't quite place, fear, perhaps. They got into the car without a word. Instead of heading home, his father drove them to the groom's house. Alex wanted to ask why, but the words caught in his throat. There was something unspoken between his parents, a silent agreement that kept them moving forward. The groom's house was a dilapidated structure, its paint peeling and windows grimy. The yard was overgrown, and the whole place had an air of neglect. Inside, the atmosphere was no better. The walls were lined with strange, old icons that seemed to watch every movement with their unsettling, painted eyes. The wedding feast was laid out in the dining room. The food looked unappetizing, the smells mingling in a way that made Alex's stomach churn. Guests picked at their plates, their faces showing varying degrees of discomfort and unease. The room was dimly lit, shadows flickering ominously in the corners. Alex sat next to Nadia, who seemed even more subdued than before. "Is this what your family gatherings are always like?" he asked, trying to lighten the mood. Nadia gave a small, sad smile. "You get used to it," she said softly. "But there's always something off." He glanced around the room. The icons on the walls were particularly disturbing. They depicted saints with severe, almost angry expressions, their eyes seeming to follow him. The more he looked, the more it felt like the icons were alive, judging them. His parents sat across the table, exchanging worried glances. His father's promise to leave right after the registration seemed a distant memory. They were stuck here, in this uncomfortable celebration, surrounded by people who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. The bride and groom sat at the head of the table, their expressions tired and strained. The bride's blue dress looked even more out of place here, in the gloom of the old house. She picked at her food, not eating much, and occasionally glanced at her new husband with a look of quiet desperation. As the evening wore on, the sense of unease grew. The conversations were hushed, the guests speaking in low, nervous tones. The icons on the walls seemed to grow more sinister, their painted eyes boring into Alex's soul. A sudden chill ran through the room, and the lights flickered. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at Nadia, who was staring at the icons with a look of fear. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before Alex could respond, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. The guests froze, their faces masks of terror. The bride's mother rushed to the kitchen, her steps echoing in the silence. Moments later, she returned, her face ashen. "It's nothing," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Alex's father stood up abruptly. "We're leaving," he announced, his voice firm. "Now." No one protested as Alex and his parents hurried out of the house. The night air was cold and crisp, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere inside. As they drove away, Alex glanced back at the house. Nadia stood in the doorway, her blue eyes wide with fear, watching them leave. The journey home was silent. The eerie events of the evening hung over them, unspoken and haunting. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they had narrowly escaped something terrible, something lurking in the shadows of that old house, something that would haunt his dreams for a long time. The wedding feast was laid out with an array of strange and unfamiliar dishes. Alex looked at the spread with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The table was filled with items like vinaigrette, a salad of beets and pickles, rye bread topped with forschmack, a herring paste, and a daunting dish of shuba, herring under a fur coat of layers of vegetables, and mayonnaise. There was also olivier, a potato salad mixed with peas and ham, and a platter of cold chicken with boiled potatoes. The sight of these unfamiliar foods made Alex's stomach twist. There was no alcohol in sight, only jugs of juice and water. The guests seemed uncomfortable, picking at the food with little enthusiasm. The atmosphere was stifling, and the strange, watchful icons on the walls made it worse. Alex tried to eat, but each bite seemed to increase his unease. The flavors were intense and foreign, leaving an unpleasant taste in his mouth. He watched his parents from across the table, their faces mirroring his discomfort. His father's earlier promise to leave quickly seemed like a distant memory, and they were now trapped in this strange, joyless celebration. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alex's father announced that they were leaving. No one protested as they hurried out of the house and into the car. The drive home was silent, the oppressive weight of the evening hanging over them. Back home, Alex felt a sharp pain in his stomach. He thought it might be the strange food, but the pain only intensified. He doubled over, groaning. "My stomach really hurts," he said, clutching his abdomen. His parents exchanged worried glances. "You're probably just tired," his mother said, though her voice wavered with concern. "It's more than that," Alex insisted, the pain twisting inside him. His father frowned. "Let's get you to bed. You'll feel better in the morning." But the pain only grew worse. Sweat beaded on Alex's forehead, and he could barely stand. His parents' skepticism turned to alarm as they watched him suffer. "We need to get him to a doctor," his mother said urgently. They helped Alex to the car, the urgency of their movements fueled by fear. The drive to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and distant sounds. Alex's vision blurred, and he fought to stay conscious. At the hospital, doctors rushed to take him in, their faces serious as they examined him. Alex could hear his parents' worried voices in the background, but their words were lost in a haze of pain. Hours later, Alex woke in a sterile hospital room, his parents by his side. The pain had subsided, replaced by a dull ache. The doctor explained that it had been a severe reaction to something he had eaten, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. The eerie wedding, the strange food, and the haunting icons all seemed to merge into a nightmarish blur in his mind. As he lay in the hospital bed, he couldn't forget Nadia's warning or the unsettling events of the evening. The sense of dread lingered, a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. Alex knew that the horror of that night would stay with him, a shadow haunting his thoughts and dreams. The next morning, Alex woke up early. His body still ached from the ordeal of the previous night, and he felt a lingering heaviness in his stomach. Despite his desire to sleep in and recover, he was forced out of bed by a pressing need to use the bathroom. The remnants of discomfort gnawed at him as he shuffled down the hallway. In the kitchen, his mother was already preparing breakfast. She greeted him with a strained smile, her eyes shadowed with worry. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked, her voice soft. "Better, I guess," Alex replied, though he wasn't entirely sure. His body felt weak, and the memory of the pain was still vivid. Breakfast was a simple bowl of oatmeal made with water. Alex stared at it, his appetite non-existent. "Do I have to eat this?" he asked, grimacing. His mother nodded. "It's good for your stomach. You need something plain and easy to digest." Reluctantly, Alex took a spoonful, the bland taste doing nothing to improve his mood. He forced himself to eat, knowing his parents were watching him closely, their concern palpable. Over the next few weeks, Alex noticed significant changes in their household. His parents began to alter their diet, introducing simple and modest meals. Gone were the rich and hearty dishes they once enjoyed. Instead, their meals consisted of plain porridges made with water, vegetable soups, and canned fish. Pasta with sausage, once a family favorite, became a rare treat. The shift was unsettling. The food was bland and unappealing, a stark contrast to the flavors they were used to. But his parents insisted it was for the best. "We need to be more mindful of what we eat," his father said one evening, as they sat down to another plain meal. Alex couldn't help but think about the wedding and the strange food they had eaten there. He remembered Nadia's warnings and the eerie icons that seemed to watch them. The sense of dread from that night still lingered, and he wondered if his parents felt it too. As the days passed, the new diet became routine. Breakfast was always oatmeal or plain rice, lunch was a simple vegetable soup, and dinner often consisted of canned fish with a side of boiled potatoes or more rice. Alex missed the variety and flavor of their old meals, but he didn't complain. He didn't want to worry his parents any more than they already were. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Alex's mother spoke up. "I know these changes are hard, but it's important. We need to stay healthy." His father nodded in agreement. "We can't risk another scare like that night. Simple food is better for us." Alex looked at his parents, seeing the determination in their eyes. They were doing their best to protect him, to ensure nothing like the wedding night ever happened again. But the sense of unease never fully left him. The shadows of that night, the strange girl, and the haunting icons were always in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of the inexplicable fear that had gripped him. As he finished his plain meal, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had been irrevocably changed. The new diet was just one part of it. The real change was in the air, a lingering tension that hung over them like a dark cloud. And deep down, Alex knew that the horror of that night was far from over. In the days that followed, Alex's parents imposed new restrictions. They banned evening computer games and television, limiting his screen time to just 1 hour a day and only during daylight hours. His phone was taken away, a precaution his parents insisted was necessary. "These things aren't good for you," his mother explained, her tone firm. "We need to focus on a healthier lifestyle." Alex felt trapped. His favorite pastimes were stripped away, and his world grew smaller. He spent his afternoons reading or doing homework, the house quiet and oppressive without the familiar background noise of television or video games. The silence was unsettling, amplifying the unease that had taken root in their lives. Desperate for some escape from the growing restrictions, Alex asked if he could visit his grandmother. She lived in a small town a few hours away, and Alex always enjoyed the freedom and comfort of her home. Reluctantly, his parents agreed. "We'll take the bus," his father said. "We're selling the car. It's too much of an expense." The bus ride was long and bumpy. Alex stared out the window, watching the landscape change from the city's gray monotony to the rolling green fields of the countryside. The rhythmic hum of the bus was almost soothing, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled their home. When they arrived, Alex's grandmother greeted them warmly. Her house was a cozy haven, filled with the comforting smells of home-cooked meals and the soft hum of the radio. It felt like a different world, far removed from the shadows that seemed to follow them. His parents spoke quietly with his grandmother, explaining the recent changes and the reasons behind them. Alex listened from the doorway, picking up fragments of their conversation. They were worried, not just about his health, but about something deeper, something they didn't fully understand themselves. "We need a break," his father said. "Some time to reset." His grandmother nodded, her expression thoughtful. "He can stay here for a while. It'll do him good." Alex spent the next few days at his grandmother's house, enjoying the freedom to play outside and the absence of strict rules. Yet, even here, the sense of unease lingered. His grandmother's house, once a place of comfort, now felt slightly off. The old paintings on the walls seemed to watch him, and the corners of the rooms held shadows that moved just out of sight. One night, as he lay in bed, he heard whispers coming from the hallway. He crept to the door and peeked out, seeing his grandmother talking to someone who wasn't there. Her voice was low and urgent, her words indistinguishable. A chill ran down Alex's spine, and he quickly retreated to his bed, pulling the covers over his head. The next morning, his grandmother acted as if nothing had happened, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He missed his parents, despite the restrictions they had imposed. The weight of the strange events and the oppressive atmosphere was too much to bear alone. When his parents returned to pick him up, Alex was relieved. The bus ride back home was quiet, his parents sitting close together, their expressions thoughtful and tense. Alex stared out the window, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare ask. Back at home, the restrictions remained, but the atmosphere seemed lighter with his family together again. Yet the sense of dread never fully left. It clung to them, a shadow that refused to be shaken, a constant reminder that the horrors of that night at the wedding were far from over. Grandma greeted her grandson with open arms, her wrinkled face breaking into a warm smile as Alex stepped into her cozy home. The smell of freshly baked bread and simmering soup filled the air, a stark contrast to the austere atmosphere of his own home lately. Alex felt a surge of relief at the familiar comfort. Hungry from the bus ride and yearning for normal food, Alex eagerly devoured the hearty meal Grandma had prepared. She watched him with concern, noticing how quickly he ate and the way he practically inhaled each bite. Concern furrowed her brow as she realized something was amiss. Curled up on a worn-out armchair after the meal, Alex recounted the recent changes at home to his grandmother. He spoke of the strict rules, the bland diet, and the eerie atmosphere that had settled over their household. Grandma listened intently, her eyes widening with each detail. Grandma's reaction was swift and fierce. Her face darkened with anger as Alex's words sank in. She rose from her chair, her hands trembling with indignation. "A cult," she exclaimed, her voice rising in disbelief. "They've fallen into a cult, those poor children." Alex watched, stunned, as his grandmother reached for the phone. Her fingers punched the numbers with urgency, her voice sharp and determined as she spoke to Alex's parents. She accused them of brainwashing and manipulating their own son, of subjecting him to mind control tactics. She vowed to involve the authorities, refusing to let Alex return to what she now believed to be a dangerous environment. "No, I won't let you take him back," she declared, her voice echoing through the small kitchen. Alex's parents were taken aback by Grandma's accusations. They tried to calm her, to explain their concerns for Alex's health and the precautions they had taken. But Grandma was adamant, her maternal instincts overriding any attempts at reasoning. The tension in the room was palpable as Alex sat between his grandmother and his parents, torn between the familiar love of his grandmother and the bewildering changes at home. He didn't understand all the implications of Grandma's accusations, but he knew that something had gone terribly wrong since that ominous wedding night. As Grandma continued to argue with his parents, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had spiraled into a nightmare. The sense of dread that had haunted him since that fateful evening intensified, and he wondered if they would ever find a way back to the normalcy they once knew. Hours later, after tearful conversations and heated debates, Alex's parents managed to calm Grandma down. They assured her they would address her concerns and promised to take Alex to see a therapist. Reluctantly, Grandma agreed to let Alex return home with his parents, but not without a solemn warning. "Keep an eye on them," she whispered to Alex as they hugged goodbye. "Don't let them control you." The bus ride back home was somber. Alex sat quietly beside his parents, their hands intertwined, the weight of Grandma's accusations heavy on their hearts. They knew they had to find a way to navigate the darkness that had enveloped their family, to reclaim their lives from the shadows that threatened to consume them. The atmosphere turned tense as Alex's parents arrived at Grandma's house. His father insisted on forcefully feeding Alex, despite Grandma's protests. Tensions escalated, and in the heat of the argument, Alex's father struck Grandma. Shocked and frightened, Alex was forcibly taken home by his father, who sternly forbade any further contact with Grandma. On the way home, Alex wept uncontrollably, overwhelmed by confusion and fear. He couldn't comprehend his parents' behavior or where to seek help. His thoughts were consumed with worry for Grandma, whom his parents had always supported before. The car ride was suffocating with unspoken tension, leaving Alex feeling isolated and unsure of what the future held. "The brutality inflicted upon me by my father was unimaginable. He resorted to using a belt as his tool of discipline, its leather straps leaving welts on my skin that burned with pain and shame. One of his cruel methods involved forcing me to stand in a tub filled with buckwheat, a humiliating and agonizing punishment that left me trembling and broken. The fear of his anger, coupled with the physical pain, became a daily torment, twisting my sense of safety and trust. Alongside the physical abuse, my life became confined by severe restrictions imposed on me. My parents dictated a diet devoid of variety or nutrition, reducing me to eating bland porridges and plain boiled potatoes day after day. This meager fare barely sustained me, leaving me perpetually hungry and weak. Worse still, I was forbidden from venturing beyond the walls of our home. Every window and door seemed to mock my confinement, serving as silent witnesses to my isolation and entrapment. The combination of physical and emotional deprivation created a suffocating atmosphere of despair. Each day blurred into the next, a relentless cycle of pain, hunger, and enforced solitude. I yearned for escape, for a reprieve from the constant dread that permeated my existence. In the midst of an overwhelmingly dire situation, my only glimmer of hope resided in the unwavering support of my grandmother. As the turmoil within our home escalated, she became my refuge, a beacon of comfort amidst the chaos. Despite her advanced age, Grandma tirelessly attempted to intervene on my behalf, offering solace and protection in the face of my parents' increasingly alarming behavior. The once stable foundation of our family crumbled under the weight of my parents' inexplicable actions. They abruptly abandoned their jobs, plunging us into financial disarray and neglecting essential bills like utilities. Their erratic behavior extended beyond neglecting responsibilities. Our home became a stage for disturbing rituals involving animals, rituals that left an indelible mark of fear and confusion on my young mind. The ominous rituals, conducted in secrecy behind closed doors, echoed with unsettling whispers of superstition and an unsettling aura of menace. I witnessed the strange rites with a mixture of horror and disbelief, unable to comprehend the motivations driving my parents' descent into such disturbing practices. Each day unfolded with a heightened sense of dread, the once familiar spaces of our home now imbued with an eerie and oppressive atmosphere that seemed to seep into every corner. As their behavior spiraled further out of control, my hopes increasingly centered on my grandmother's efforts to shield me from the escalating madness. Despite her valiant attempts to intervene and offer sanctuary, her influence faltered against the overwhelming tide of my parents' darkening intentions. The fragile stability of my world had shattered irreparably, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty and fear, clinging to the dwindling hope that somehow, someone would rescue me from the nightmare gripping our family. One night, the horror reached a new level. My parents forced me to participate in a terrifying ritual involving a goat. In the dimly lit kitchen, the air thick with incense and an eerie silence, I watched in frozen terror as they prepared the animal for sacrifice. The goat's plaintive bleats echoed through the room, a haunting sound that seemed to reverberate in my very soul. My parents chanted in a language I couldn't understand, their eyes glazed with a fanaticism that terrified me. They handed me a knife, their expectation clear I had to be a part of this grotesque ceremony. Trembling and nauseous, I barely managed to hold the blade, let alone use it. The sight of the blood and the sheer horror of the act would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It became painfully clear that my parents had become deeply entrenched in a cult. This group, shrouded in secrecy and darkness, demanded animal sacrifices and involved their members in bizarre, sinister rituals. My parents' transformation was complete. They were no longer the caring, rational people I once knew. Instead, they had become instruments of the cult's twisted ideology, forcing me to witness and participate in their dark ceremonies. The cult's grip on them was unrelenting, and I was ensnared in its grasp, a helpless pawn in their macabre games. I learned that the cult believed these sacrifices were necessary to appease dark forces and bring about their distorted vision of salvation. The rituals were performed with a chilling precision, each act more disturbing than the last. My parents, once my protectors, now seemed like strangers, their eyes cold and unrecognizable. They spoke of the cult's teachings with reverence, insisting that this was the path to true enlightenment and salvation. Every day became a struggle for survival, my existence dominated by fear and a desperate hope for escape. The normalcy I once knew was a distant memory, replaced by a relentless cycle of terror and coercion. I felt trapped in a nightmare, my cries for help swallowed by the cult's oppressive presence. Despite the darkness surrounding me, I clung to the faint hope that somehow I could break free from the cult's grasp and reclaim my life. The transformation in my parents' beliefs began after they attended a wedding that turned out to be a recruitment event for the cult. Their minds were thoroughly brainwashed during that event, and from that moment on, our lives were consumed by their new convictions. They started living strictly according to the cult's doctrines, and their devotion to these twisted teachings grew stronger each day. My home, once a sanctuary, became a place of constant fear and strange rituals. To support the cult financially, my parents sold off our possessions one by one. My phone was the first to go, severing my last connection to the outside world and isolating me even further. Then they sold our car, leaving us with no means of transportation and further trapping us in our dire situation. They even stopped paying the bills, plunging our home into darkness and disrepair. Our house, once warm and welcoming, now felt like a prison. The electricity was cut off, and the water ran cold. The few possessions we had left were shabby and sparse. Every day I watched as my parents' obsession with the cult deepened, and our living conditions deteriorated. The cult's demands grew more stringent, and my parents' willingness to comply only increased. They believed that these sacrifices would bring them closer to salvation, but all they brought was misery and fear. Our meals became sparse and unappetizing, consisting mainly of the plain porridges and boiled potatoes that the cult deemed appropriate. The atmosphere in our home was oppressive, filled with the constant undercurrent of tension and the ever-present threat of another ritual. My parents' eyes were hollow, their faces gaunt, and their behavior increasingly erratic. They spoke of the cult's leader with reverence, convinced that they were on the path to enlightenment. Despite my terror and isolation, I clung to the hope that someone would rescue me from this nightmare. I dreamt of escaping, of finding a way to break free from the cult's clutches and reclaiming my life. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, that hope seemed to grow dimmer. The cult's grip on my family was tightening, and I was left to navigate the darkness alone, my spirit worn down by the relentless cycle of fear and despair. The severity of the punishments I endured for the slightest act of disobedience was harrowing. My parents, consumed by their cult's doctrines, meted out brutal physical abuse and relentless psychological pressure. A missed chore or a moment of hesitation during a ritual could result in a beating, often administered with a belt or a makeshift rod. The psychological torment was equally brutal, with my parents subjecting me to intense isolation, relentless indoctrination, and constant threats. The oppressive atmosphere in our home became unbearable, filled with an ever-present sense of dread and anticipation of the next punishment. Desperation finally drove me to a daring escape. One night, while my parents were preoccupied with yet another ominous ritual, I saw my chance. My heart pounded as I approached the window of my small, second-floor bedroom. With a mixture of fear and determination, I forced the window open, the cool night air a stark contrast to the stifling environment inside. Without allowing myself to hesitate, I climbed out and jumped. The fall was jarring, but the adrenaline dulled the pain as I scrambled to my feet and ran. The night was a blur as I fled, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and the house of horrors I had called home. Eventually, I stumbled upon a group of young people gathered around a bonfire in a park. Exhausted and terrified, I collapsed near them, my frantic explanations pouring out between gasps for breath. Recognizing the severity of my situation, they quickly took action. One of them called the police while another offered me a jacket and some water. Their kindness was a stark contrast to the cruelty I had escaped from, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a glimmer of hope. The police arrived swiftly, and as I recounted my ordeal to the officers, I could see their expressions harden with determination. The young people who had found me stayed by my side, their presence a comforting reminder that I was no longer alone. As the police escorted me to safety, I looked back at the group, grateful beyond words for their intervention. The journey to healing and reclaiming my life was only just beginning, but in that moment I knew I had taken the first, crucial step towards freedom. The chilling revelations came to light through a local news broadcast that sent shockwaves through our community. The lead story was the arrest of the cult leader, a man whose name had become synonymous with fear and control in my life. The newscaster's voice trembled as she detailed the extensive list of crimes committed by the cult heinous acts that included not only animal sacrifices but also the murders and abductions of innocent people. As the segment unfolded, graphic images of the cult's hidden lair flashed across the screen. Dimly lit rooms filled with occult symbols and blood-stained altars revealed the true extent of their depravity. Victims' personal belongings, scattered across the floor like grim reminders of the lives lost, further underscored the horror of the situation. The newscaster explained how the cult had operated in secrecy, its members deeply indoctrinated and coerced into participating in unspeakable acts. Survivors came forward, their testimonies heart-wrenching and horrifying. They spoke of being lured into the cult with promises of enlightenment and community, only to be subjected to brutal rituals and mind control. Some had been held captive for years, enduring endless cycles of physical and psychological torture. Their stories mirrored my own experiences, each account resonating deeply and bringing tears to my eyes. One particularly haunting account came from a woman who had been missing for over a decade. She described the cult's methods of manipulation and control, painting a vivid picture of the terror she had lived through. Her voice, though shaken, carried a tone of resilience and hope, inspiring a renewed determination in me to rebuild my life. The broadcast ended with a plea for any additional victims or witnesses to come forward, the police assuring the public that they were committed to bringing every member of the cult to justice. The revelation of the cult's crimes sent ripples of shock and outrage throughout the community, galvanizing efforts to support the survivors and prevent such atrocities from occurring again. In the days that followed, the news of the cult's exposure and the leader's arrest became the subject of every conversation. People offered their support, creating a network of care and solidarity that stood in stark contrast to the isolation and fear the cult had instilled. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of safety and community beginning to form around me, providing a foundation upon which to start healing from the horrors I had endured. The clock on the nightstand blinked 2:47 a.m. in harsh red numerals. I groggily reached for my phone, half blinded by the screen's sudden brightness. Dennis, it read, and my heart sank. Dennis had a habit of drinking too much and calling friends in the dead of night, often muttering incoherent nonsense before passing out. This was not the first time, but something about this call felt different. It rang again, insistent and jarring in the silence of my darkened bedroom. I let it ring, hoping he'd get the hint and hang up. But the calls kept coming, each one more persistent than the last. I finally answered, intending to tell him off and get back to sleep. "Dennis, it's almost 3 in the morning." "What do you want?" I snapped. But there was no drunken slur, no slurred apology or laugh. Instead, there was a low, guttural breathing on the other end, a sound that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. "Dennis," I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. The breathing continued, deep and raspy, almost as if someone were struggling for air. "Who is this?" I demanded, my pulse quickening with a growing sense of unease. But there was no reply, just that unnerving breath. My thumb hovered over the end call button, and finally I pressed it. I lay back down, trying to calm myself, but the silence of the room felt oppressive now. I decided to silence my phone, hoping to block out any further disturbances. As I reached for it, it rang again, making me jump. Dennis's name flashed on the screen once more. With a shaking hand, I declined the call and turned the phone to silent. I turned over and closed my eyes, trying to will myself back to sleep, but the image of Dennis's name glowing on the screen was burned into my mind. What if he was in trouble? What if he needed help? The thoughts churned in my head, but the memory of that unsettling breathing kept me from calling back. I must have drifted off, though uneasily, because the next thing I knew, my alarm was blaring. Morning light seeped through the curtains, and I felt a strange mix of relief and residual dread. I reached for my phone and saw numerous missed calls from Dennis, all time-stamped around the same time. My finger hovered over the call back button, but I hesitated. Finally, I dialed his number, my heart pounding with each ring. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dennis, call me back when you get this. I got your calls last night. I'm worried about you." Hours passed with no word from Dennis. I went about my day, but the nagging worry never left. It wasn't until the afternoon that I got a call from a mutual friend. "Have you heard from Dennis?" they asked, their voice heavy with concern. "He's missing. No one can reach him." A chill ran down my spine as I recounted the strange calls from the night before. The unsettling breathing, the persistent ringing. Could it have been Dennis? Or was it something else entirely? The thought gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to Dennis, I had been a part of it, if only through the phone. Morning light seeped through the curtains as I reached for my phone, the memory of the eerie call still vivid. I dialed Dennis's number. He answered, groggy but sober. "Hey man, what's up?" "Did you call me last night?" I asked. "No, I was asleep." "Why?" he replied, sounding genuinely confused. "You called several times around 3 in the morning. There was this strange breathing on the line." Dennis was silent for a moment. I swear I didn't call you. My phone was in the living room. A cold shiver ran down my spine. If it wasn't Dennis, then who was calling me? I ended the conversation with a lingering sense of unease. A few nights passed without incident, and I began to relax. But then, a week later, it happened again. The phone rang in the dead of night, jolting me awake. Dennis's name glowed on the screen. I silenced the call, my heart pounding. The calls became more frequent, each one more unsettling than the last. Each time, the same heavy, labored breathing greeted me. My girlfriend, Lisa, noticed my growing anxiety. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Dennis has been calling in the middle of the night, but he swears it's not him," I said. "It's weird and creepy." Lisa frowned. "Maybe someone else is using his phone? Or a glitch?" "I don't think so. The breathing feels too deliberate." That night I turned my phone off completely, but the peace was short-lived. Lisa's phone rang, piercing the quiet of our bedroom. She answered it, her face going pale. "It's Dennis," she whispered, her voice trembling. I took the phone. "Hello," the same eerie breathing met my ear. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, but there was no reply, just that relentless breathing. We hung up, both of us shaken. The next day, I confronted Dennis again. He looked genuinely worried. "Maybe someone's messing with us," he suggested, fear in his eyes. The calls continued, deepening the sense of dread. Lisa and I began to dread the night, waiting for the inevitable ring. We discussed every possibility, from phone hacking to supernatural occurrences, but nothing seemed to fit. The calls felt too personal, too targeted. One night, as the phone rang again, I felt a surge of anger. "This has to stop," I said, grabbing the phone. Lisa grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't answer it," she pleaded. "Please." But I needed to know who or what was behind this. I answered the call, bracing myself. "Whoever you are, this needs to stop." For the first time, the breathing stopped, replaced by chilling silence. Then, a low, distorted voice whispered, "It's too late." The call ended abruptly, leaving me in a cold sweat. Whoever or whatever was calling, it wasn't just a prank. It felt like a warning. As the nights wore on, we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something sinister lurking just beyond the reach of the light. The calls had opened a door to something we didn't understand, and we had no idea how to close it. Lisa suggested that Dennis might be sleepwalking and unaware of his actions. "Maybe he's a sleepwalker. He could be calling you without realizing it," she said, trying to find a logical explanation. I shook my head, unconvinced. I've known Dennis for years. He's never mentioned sleepwalking. And the calls, they feel too intentional, too sinister. Despite my doubts, the possibility lingered in my mind. Could Dennis really be sleepwalking and making those eerie calls? Or was something more disturbing at play? Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to visit Dennis. I called him first to make sure he was home and headed over in the afternoon. His apartment building loomed before me, its old bricks and dim hallways adding to the sense of unease that had settled over me. Dennis greeted me at the door, looking tired and a bit on edge. "Hey, thanks for coming over," he said, forcing a smile. I stepped inside, immediately struck by the unusual atmosphere in the apartment. It felt colder than it should have been, and there was a faint, unsettling smell that I couldn't quite place. "How have you been?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I took a seat on his worn-out couch. Dennis shrugged, rubbing his temples. "Honestly, not great. I've been having these weird dreams, and I wake up feeling exhausted. And those calls, I don't understand it. I swear I'm not making them." As he spoke, I noticed his hands were trembling slightly. There was a hollowness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Are you sure you're not sleepwalking?" I asked gently. He shook his head vehemently. "I've never sleptwalked in my life, and even if I was, how could I make those calls without knowing it?" I didn't have an answer. The unsettling feeling in the apartment seemed to grow stronger, as if something unseen was watching us. "Can I look around?" I asked, feeling a strange compulsion to explore his place. Dennis nodded, looking puzzled. Sure, but there's not much to see. I wandered through the small apartment, noticing the odd details. There were scratch marks on the walls near the bedroom door and an old, musty smell coming from a corner of the living room. In the bedroom, the air was even colder. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled and thrown about as if Dennis had been thrashing in his sleep. Something caught my eye on the nightstand, a small, antique-looking box. "What's this?" I asked, picking it up. Dennis's face paled. "I found that a few weeks ago at a flea market. I thought it looked cool, but ever since I brought it home, things have been off." A chill ran down my spine as I opened the box, revealing a collection of old, faded photographs and a strange, rusted key. "Have you tried using the key?" I asked. Dennis shook his head. "I have no idea what it's for. I've been too freaked out to even think about it." As I stared at the contents of the box, a sense of dread washed over me. This wasn't just a case of sleepwalking or prank calls. Something far more sinister was at play. I could feel it in the air, pressing down on us with an almost tangible weight. "We need to get rid of this," I said, closing the box and handing it to Dennis. "Whatever is happening, I think it's connected to this." Dennis nodded, his face pale. "But how? And what if it doesn't stop?" "We'll figure it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But we can't ignore this. Not anymore." As I left Dennis's apartment, the sense of unease stayed with me. The calls, the strange atmosphere, the antique box, it all pointed to something far darker than I had imagined. Whatever was haunting Dennis, it was growing stronger, and I feared we were running out of time to stop it. Stepping into Dennis's apartment, I was immediately struck by the stark contrast between the stifling heat outside and the unusual chill inside. It was as if I had walked into a refrigerator, the air unnaturally cold and heavy. I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that settled over me as I took off my jacket. "Is your AC cranked up or something?" I asked, rubbing my arms to ward off the chill. Dennis shook his head, his expression troubled. "No, the thermostat says it's set to 72, but it feels much colder. I can't explain it." A shiver ran down my spine, not just from the cold, but from a growing sense of unease. There was something profoundly wrong here, something that went beyond mere temperature anomalies. Dennis led me to the living room, where an old, large canvas leaned against the wall. It was covered with a cloth, but I could see strange, dark shapes faintly visible through the fabric. "I need to show you something," Dennis said, his voice tense. He pulled the cloth away, revealing the painting underneath. At first glance, it seemed like an abstract piece, dark and chaotic. But as I looked closer, I realized the shapes were not random. Faces and figures emerged from the shadows, twisted and contorted in silent agony. The longer I stared, the more it felt like the figures were moving, shifting ever so slightly. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I found it at an antique shop a few weeks ago," Dennis explained. "At first, it seemed like just a creepy old painting, but then I started noticing changes. The figures, they move. Sometimes I hear whispers coming from it at night." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "And you think this is connected to the calls?" Dennis nodded. "I do. The calls started not long after I brought this home. I thought it was just my imagination at first, but now, I don't know. I feel like I'm being watched, even in my own home." I moved closer to the painting, hesitant but compelled to understand. The faces on the canvas seemed to follow me, their eyes filled with a silent, desperate plea. The air around the painting was even colder, a palpable chill that seemed to seep into my bones. "Have you tried getting rid of it?" I asked, turning back to Dennis. "I've thought about it," he admitted, "but I'm afraid of what might happen if I do. What if whatever's attached to it gets angry? What if it follows me?" The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't just about creepy calls or strange paintings. Denise was genuinely terrified, and now, so was I. "We need to find out where this came from," I said firmly. "Maybe there's something about its history that can help us understand what's happening." Dennis agreed, and we spent the next hour researching the painting online, but found nothing definitive. As we dug deeper, the air in the apartment grew colder, and the sense of dread more intense. It was clear that whatever was happening, it was beyond our understanding, something ancient and malevolent. As I left Dennis's apartment that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had uncovered something we were never meant to find. The strange calls, the shifting painting, the unnatural chill, everything pointed to a dark presence that had latched onto Dennis. And now, it seemed, it had set its sights on me too. I noticed an unsettling change in Dennis's behavior as the evening wore on. His eyes darted nervously around the room, and he jumped at the slightest sound. He seemed distant, distracted, as if he were constantly listening for something just beyond the edge of hearing. The unusual chill in the apartment only heightened my sense of unease. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked, watching him closely. Dennis rubbed his temples and nodded. "I just haven't been sleeping well. The calls, the painting, it's all getting to me." I decided to stay the night at Dennis's place. Maybe if I was there, I could better understand what was happening and offer some reassurance. I set up a makeshift bed on the couch, keeping an eye on Dennis as he moved restlessly around the apartment, his anxiety palpable. Sometime after midnight, I drifted into a fitful sleep, my mind plagued by half-formed nightmares. The apartment was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making every creak and rustle seem amplified. I was abruptly awakened by the sound of a phone ringing. I bolted upright, disoriented and groggy, and saw Dennis's phone vibrating on the coffee table next to me. The caller ID showed an unknown number, and my heart pounded in my chest as I reached for it. "Hello," I answered, my voice barely steady. At first, there was nothing but static, and then I heard it, the same labored, heavy breathing that had haunted my own phone calls. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice from shaking. The breathing continued, slow and deliberate, filling the silence with a chilling rhythm. "What do you want?" I asked, my fear turning to frustration. A low, distorted voice finally broke through the static. "You cannot escape." The call ended abruptly, leaving me in stunned silence. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Dennis's phone had been right next to me all night. There was no way he could have made the call, yet here I was, holding the evidence in my trembling hand. Dennis stumbled out of his bedroom, his eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" I heard the phone. I handed it to him, my hand still shaking. It rang. The same breathing, the same voice. "But it came from your phone." Dennis looked at the screen, his face pale. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "I didn't make that call." The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an unseen presence. The shadows in the corners appeared to deepen, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. We were not alone. Something malevolent had taken hold of Dennis, and now it was making its presence known to me as well. "We need to figure this out," I said, my voice firm despite my fear. "We can't let this thing control us." Dennis nodded, but his eyes were filled with a hopelessness that chilled me to the core. Whatever was happening, it was beyond our understanding, and I feared we were running out of time to stop it. The rest of the night passed in a tense, sleepless vigil, both of us jumping at every small sound. As dawn broke, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly, but the fear lingered. We were dealing with something dark and ancient, something that would not easily be banished. And as I left Dennis's apartment later that morning, I knew that the calls, the painting, the chilling presence were all part of a larger, more terrifying reality we had yet to fully comprehend. I found myself in a strange and unsettling position as midnight approached. Dennis had begun to exhibit signs of sleepwalking, his movements slow and deliberate as he wandered the apartment in a trance-like state. I watched, tense and uneasy, as he drifted from room to room, his eyes glassy and unfocused. The air was heavy with an unspoken dread, the kind that settles deep in your bones and refuses to let go. For half an hour, I remained still, my eyes following Dennis's every move. I hoped he would eventually move into another room, or perhaps return to his bed. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching into an eternity. I could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of a clock somewhere in the apartment, each tick a reminder of the slow passage of time. As I lay there, my grip tightened around my phone. The cold, hard surface of it was the only thing grounding me to reality. My mind raced, filled with questions and fears that I couldn't quite articulate. Dennis's sleepwalking was unnerving, but there was something deeper, something darker at play. Suddenly, I found myself unable to move. It was as if an invisible force had wrapped itself around my limbs, holding me in place. I tried to lift my hand to turn off my phone or at least silence it, but my fingers refused to obey. A wave of panic washed over me as I realized I was completely paralyzed. I could see Dennis in the hallway, his shadowy figure swaying slightly as he stood there, staring at nothing. The oppressive chill in the apartment seemed to intensify, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My breathing became shallow and rapid, the paralyzing fear taking hold of me. The phone in my hand suddenly felt like a lead weight, its screen casting a faint, eerie glow. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but my voice was trapped in my throat. All I could do was lie there, frozen, my eyes wide open and filled with terror. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards as Denise shuffled about. I could hear the distant hum of the city outside, a reminder of the world beyond this nightmare. But in that moment, it felt like we were the only two people in existence, trapped in a waking horror that defied explanation. Minutes turned into hours, or so it seemed. My mind teetered on the edge of sanity, grappling with the impossibility of the situation. The paralysis held me in its grip, a cruel mockery of sleep, leaving me powerless to escape. Eventually, Dennis wandered back to his bedroom, his movements slow and mechanical. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and the oppressive silence settled over the apartment once more. The paralysis began to fade, leaving me exhausted and shaken. I lay there for a long time, my mind reeling from the experience. The strange calls, the eerie painting, the cold, and now this something was very wrong. And I knew, deep down, that whatever it wasn't finished with us yet. Despite Denise being in the same room, strange noises filled the air, adding to my growing sense of dread. I lay on the couch, paralyzed, as soft shuffling sounds echoed through the apartment. It sounded like someone or something was moving around, though I knew Dennis was motionless, lost in his sleepwalking trance. The scratching began next, a slow, deliberate scraping that sent chills down my spine. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me. I could hear the unmistakable sound of nails dragging across the wooden frame of the couch, inching closer with each passing second. As if the noises weren't enough, the phone calls persisted, their eerie cadence relentless. Each ring seemed to mock my helplessness, filling the room with a cold, mechanical sound. The breathing on the other end was almost a relief from the silence, yet it was more horrifying in its familiarity. I lay there, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest. The combination of sounds created a cacophony of terror, each noise amplifying the other. The shuffling, the scratching, the ringing, all of it blended into a nightmare symphony that left me frozen in fear. After what felt like an eternity, I drifted into a fitful, uneasy sleep, my dreams plagued by shadowy figures and whispered threats. The apartment remained cold and silent, a tomb of restless spirits. When I finally awoke, the first light of dawn was creeping through the curtains, casting long shadows on the walls. Exhausted and shaken, I decided it was time to leave. I couldn't bear another moment in that place. I stood up from the couch, my limbs stiff and sore from the night's ordeal. My mind was foggy, but the need to escape was clear. I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb Denise or whatever might still be lurking in the shadows. As I approached the front door, a nagging feeling tugged at me. I hesitated, then turned back toward Dennis's bedroom. Pushing the door open a crack, I peered inside. Dennis lay on his bed, sleeping soundly, his face peaceful and untroubled. It was hard to believe that this same man had been at the center of such terrifying events. He looked so innocent, so normal. It was almost as if the night had been a twisted figment of my imagination. But the memory of the sounds, the calls, and the cold was all too real. I knew I couldn't ignore what had happened. Stepping back, I closed the door softly behind me and headed for the exit. As I left the apartment, the morning sun felt like a warm embrace. a stark contrast to the icy atmosphere I had just escaped. But even in the daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, something that wouldn't let go so easily. The events of the night replayed in my mind, a grim reminder that the horror was far from over. Dennis's peaceful slumber seemed like a cruel joke, a brief respite from a darkness that would soon return. And as I walked away, I knew that whatever haunted him now had its sights set on me. At work, I struggled to focus. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind, a relentless loop of terror and confusion. My exhaustion was palpable, and it wasn't long before my boss noticed. "You look terrible." "Everything okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I mustered a weak smile. "Just didn't sleep well. Some personal stuff going on. Do you mind if I leave early today?" He nodded sympathetically. "Take care of yourself. Go ahead." I left the office, my thoughts racing. As soon as I got outside, I called Lisa. She answered on the first ring, her voice trembling. "Thank God you called," she said. "I've been trying to reach you." "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Last night I got a series of calls. The same heavy breathing, and then a voice. It threatened me, said things that. It knew personal details. I'm scared." My grip on the phone tightened. "Did you recognize the voice?" It sounded distorted, but I could swear it was Dina, she said, her voice breaking. "And that's not all. I got a photo this morning." "A photo," I repeated, feeling a chill run down my spine. Lisa's voice was strained with fear. "Yes, a photo. It was sent from Dina's number. It's a picture of our house, taken from outside. You can see the living room window, the one where I was sitting last night." My blood ran cold. "I'm coming home right now. Don't open the door for anyone, okay?" "Okay," she whispered. "Please hurry." I drove home as fast as I could, my mind racing with possibilities. How could Dennis be behind this when he was sleepwalking all night? Was he somehow controlling this from a distance, or was there something more sinister at play? When I got home, Lisa was waiting for me, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She handed me her phone, showing me the photo. The image was unnerving, a perfectly framed shot of our house, the window illuminated from within. "It was sent at 3 a.m., she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was sitting right there when it was taken." I examined the photo closely, looking for any clues. There was nothing overtly strange about it, except for the time and the sender. "We need to find out what's going on with Dennis," I said, feeling a mixture of anger and fear. "Something isn't right, and we can't let this continue." Lisa nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "What if he comes here? What if he tries to hurt us?" I pulled her into a tight embrace, trying to offer some comfort despite my own fear. "We'll figure this out. We won't let him hurt us. But we need to stay vigilant." The sense of dread that had followed me from Dennis's apartment was now a palpable presence in our own home. The calls, the photo, the threats, they were all pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a dark, malevolent force. And as we sat together, holding each other tightly, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. We were up against something beyond our understanding, and it wouldn't stop until it had consumed us both. Despite my attempts to reassure Lisa, the fear continued to grip us both as the calls to the intercom and the persistent knocking on our apartment door persisted. The night stretched on with relentless persistence. Each ring of the intercom jolted us awake, sending shivers down our spines. Lisa clung to me, her nails digging into my arm as we listened to the echoing chimes reverberate through the apartment. "It's him," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I tried to stay calm, to convince myself that it was just a prank or a misunderstanding. But the calls were relentless, coming at irregular intervals throughout the night. Each time I mustered the courage to check the intercom screen, but there was never anyone there, just the darkened hallway beyond. The knocking on the door was worse. It echoed through the silent apartment like a drumbeat of dread, each thud louder than the last. Lisa pressed herself against me, her breath hitching in fearful anticipation. "We have to call the police," she finally said, her voice shaking. I hesitated, torn between the fear of what might be waiting outside and the need to protect us. But with each passing minute, the tension grew thicker, suffocating us in its grip. "We can't stay here," I said finally, my voice trembling. "We have to get out." Together we gathered a few essentials and made our way cautiously to the door. The knocking intensified as we approached, as if sensing our escape. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door and swung it open, ready to confront whatever or whoever was on the other side. But there was nothing. The hallway stretched before us, empty and dimly lit. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. I stepped cautiously into the corridor, scanning for any sign of movement, but there was none. Lisa clung to my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "Where are they?" she whispered. I shook my head, at a loss for words. The calls, the knocking, they had all ceased abruptly, leaving us in an eerie silence that was almost worse than the noise. "We have to go," I said, my voice urgent. "Now." We hurried down the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. Outside, the night air was cold and still, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed our apartment just moments before. As we drove away, the fear slowly began to ebb, replaced by a sense of profound relief. But I knew it was only temporary. Whatever had tormented us that night was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another opportunity to strike. And as we glanced back at our now deserted home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something far more sinister than we could ever comprehend. Determined to unravel the mystery, I headed to Dennis's apartment the next day. His building stood silent and imposing under the midday sun, its windows reflecting a distorted image of the bustling street below. I rang the bell, waiting anxiously for a response. A neighbor appeared at the door, her expression wary. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing me with suspicion. "I'm a friend of Dennis's," I explained quickly. "I've been trying to reach him." She nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting me. "There have been strange things happening here," she admitted in a hushed tone. "Noises in the night, odd smells. I thought Dennis was renovating or something, but now I'm not so sure." My unease deepened as I followed her up the stairs to Dennis's apartment. The hallway seemed darker than usual, the air heavy with a faint, lingering odor that made my stomach churn. When she unlocked the door, I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what I would find inside. Stepping into Dennis's apartment was like entering a surreal nightmare. The air was thick with tension, the usual warmth of the place replaced by an unsettling chill. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, papers strewn across the floor. But what caught my attention immediately was the painting hanging prominently on the wall. It depicted a man with hauntingly bloodshot eyes, his face contorted in agony, surrounded by swirling crimson hues that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The unsettling image sent a shiver down my spine, and I couldn't tear my gaze away. Dennis himself was sitting in a corner of the room, his posture rigid and his eyes unfocused. He seemed oblivious to my presence, lost in a world of his own making. His clothes were rumpled, his hair disheveled, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Dennis," I stammered, approaching cautiously. "Are you all right?" He looked up slowly, his eyes clouded with confusion. "Who are you?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's me, your friend," I said gently, trying to hide my growing concern. "What's been going on? Why is everything like this?" Dennis blinked slowly, as if trying to process my words. "I don't know," he murmured finally. "I can't remember. It's all a blur." The room seemed to close in around us, the oppressive atmosphere suffocating. I glanced back at the painting, its malevolent presence almost palpable. There was something deeply wrong here, something that defied rational explanation. As I stood there, grappling with the unfolding horror, a sudden movement caught my eye. It was subtle at first, a shadowy figure darting across the room, but it vanished before I could make sense of it. Fear tightened its grip on my heart, and I knew we were not alone. "We need to get you help," I said urgently, reaching out to Dennis. But he recoiled, his eyes widening in sudden terror. "They're here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They won't leave me alone." I turned towards the door, my instincts screaming at me to flee. But before I could take another step, the lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows across the walls. And in that moment of darkness, I heard a soft, sinister whisper that sent a chill down my spine. "You can't save him." The voice seemed to echo through the apartment, filling the silence with its malevolent promise. My blood ran cold as I realized the full extent of the danger we were in. But I couldn't leave Dennis like this. Ignoring my fear, I reached out to him again, desperate to break through whatever darkness had consumed him. Whether it was a malevolent force or a psychological breakdown, I knew I couldn't abandon my friend. As the shadows closed in around us, I clung to the hope that we would find a way out of this nightmare. But deep down, I feared that some horrors were beyond our control, lurking in the shadows of Dennis's fractured mind. The apartment was a scene straight out of a nightmare. As I stepped further inside, the air grew thick with an oppressive tension that seemed to seep into my bones. The painting on the wall caught my eye immediately, a grotesque portrayal of a man with bloodshot eyes and a black, clawed hand reaching out from the canvas. It held me in a trance, its twisted imagery etching itself into my mind with an unsettling intensity. But it was not just the painting that unnerved me. As I ventured deeper into Dennis's apartment, I encountered inexplicable phenomena that defied all reason. Dennis himself, once my friend, now moved with an eerie grace along the walls, his movements spider-like and unnatural. His eyes were vacant, devoid of recognition or awareness, as if he were merely a puppet being manipulated by unseen forces. Each corner of the room seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, casting sinister shadows that danced along the walls. The air hummed with a low, ominous thrum, as if the very fabric of reality were unraveling before my eyes. I struggled to comprehend what I was witnessing. Was this madness, a hallucination, or something far more sinister? As I stood there, grappling with the horrors unfolding around me, a sudden movement above caught my attention. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat, as Dennis's figure materialized on the ceiling. His face contorted grotesquely, his features morphing into something reptilian. A forked tongue flickered between elongated, razor-sharp teeth. "Who are you?" hissed this monstrous version of Dennis, his voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the room. At the same moment, another Dennis appeared before me, looking bewildered and disoriented. He stared at me with confusion, his expression mirroring my own shock and fear. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice trembling with uncertainty. I stumbled back, torn between the two conflicting images of my friend. One was a nightmarish apparition, its presence dripping with malice and menace. The other was the Dennis I knew, a person trapped in a nightmare not of his own making. I struggled to find my voice, to make sense of the surreal tableau unfolding before me. "Dennis," I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. "What's happening to you?" The monstrous Dennis hissed again, its eyes narrowing with predatory intent. "He doesn't belong here," it sneered, gesturing towards the bewildered Dennis standing beside me. The room seemed to tilt on its axis, the walls closing in around us with a suffocating intensity. Fear clawed at my chest, threatening to overwhelm me. I had stepped into a world where reality blurred with nightmare, where the line between friend and fiend was terrifyingly thin. As I backed away, my gaze flickered between the two Dennis's, one a grotesque parody, the other a frightened soul trapped in a waking horror. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something beyond comprehension, a darkness that lurked within the depths of Dennis's troubled mind. And as I fled from that accursed apartment, haunted by the memory of what I had seen, I knew that whatever had taken hold of Dennis was not done with me. Its malevolent presence lingered like a stain on my soul, a reminder that some terrors defy explanation and that nightmares can come to life in the most unexpected of places. I recounted to Dennis the bizarre occurrences and unsettling calls, hoping for clarity or at least some shared concern. His response was unsettlingly calm, a serene detachment that clashed starkly with the gravity of my words. He listened without flinching, his expression unreadable. "I haven't been home for over a week," Dennis finally said, his voice steady. "I've been staying at my sister's place." His words hit me like a cold wave. Could he be lying, or was he genuinely unaware of what had transpired in his own apartment? Doubts gnawed at me, twisting my gut into knots of uncertainty. Despite my lingering suspicions, Dennis's calm demeanor persuaded me to invite him over for a late-night discussion. Perhaps confronting the mysteries together would shed light on the shadows haunting us. Lisa and I prepared for his arrival, our nerves taut with anticipation. When Dennis finally arrived, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. He greeted us warmly, his demeanor reassuringly familiar yet subtly off-kilter. We settled in the living room, the soft glow of lamps casting long shadows across the walls. "We need to talk about what's been happening," I began, my voice betraying a mix of anxiety and urgency. "These calls, the strange occurrences, it's like something out of a nightmare." Dennis nodded thoughtfully, his gaze distant, as if retracing his steps through a foggy memory. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he urged, his tone gentle yet insistent. As I recounted the events, each word seemed to weigh heavier in the air, the room growing quieter with every passing moment. Dennis listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. But as the minutes stretched into hours, a subtle unease settled over me. It became apparent that Dennis was deliberately prolonging the conversation, asking probing questions, delving into details that seemed inconsequential. His intent was not to clarify, but to delay, to keep us engaged in this nocturnal exchange, far from the safety of our own home. Lisa glanced at me, her eyes filled with silent apprehension. The night wore on, the clock ticking relentlessly towards dawn, and yet Dennis showed no signs of leaving. Each passing minute deepened the sense of foreboding that had taken root in my mind. "We should probably call it a night," I finally suggested, my voice strained with fatigue and unease. Dennis nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on us with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "Of course," he replied softly, rising from his seat. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I'll see you soon." As he walked towards the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, that Dennis's visit had unearthed more questions than answers. The night outside was eerily quiet as he disappeared into the darkness, leaving us alone with our doubts and fears. Lisa and I exchanged a weary glance, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on us like a suffocating blanket. Whatever was happening, whatever secrets Dennis held close, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. The darkness had not yet revealed its full hand, and I feared what horrors lay waiting in the shadows of our next encounter. The evening had settled into an uneasy quiet when I absent-mindedly checked my phone, expecting nothing more than the usual notifications. But there was a voice message from Dennis, time-stamped half an hour ago, when he was supposedly with us. My heart skipped a beat as I played it. "Hey guys, I'm sorry. I should have believed you about the strange events. I went to see a witch. She said she could help me. Help me say goodbye to my father. I had to do something." Dennis's voice trembled with an unsettling mixture of regret and desperation. The words hung in the air, laden with implications that sent a chill down my spine. What had Dennis gotten himself into, and what did it have to do with the eerie occurrences that had plagued us? A sense of dread settled over me like a heavy fog as I wandered into the kitchen, seeking solace in the mundane routine of making tea. But what I found shattered any semblance of normalcy. There, slumped against the counter, was Dennis, his clothes stained with blood, his head bowed in an unnatural stillness. My breath caught in my throat as I realized something terrible had happened. Fear gripped me as I turned, expecting the worst, and there she was, Anja, my love, standing just a few feet away. Her expression was frozen in terror, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Anja," I cried out, my voice hoarse with panic. What happened?" But before she could answer, before I could reach out to her, a shadow passed over us, engulfing the kitchen in a suffocating darkness. And in an instant, they were gone. Dennis and Anja vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a lingering echo of their presence. I dialed Dennis's number frantically, my fingers trembling against the smooth surface of my phone. Each ring seemed to stretch into eternity, unanswered and unanswered again. Panic rose within me like a tidal wave, threatening to drown out all reason. "They're gone," I whispered to myself, a sinking realization settling in my chest. They vanished. The weight of guilt and helplessness bore down on me with crushing force. What had I missed? What could I have done differently to prevent this nightmarish turn of events? The unanswered questions gnawed at my mind, fueling a maelstrom of emotions: fear, sorrow, and an inexplicable sense of foreboding. As the night wore on, I paced the empty rooms of my apartment, haunted by the silence that now echoed back at me. Each corner held memories of Denise and Anja, now swallowed by a darkness that defied comprehension. And as the first rays of dawn pierced through the curtains, I knew that our lives had been irrevocably changed by forces beyond our control. But amidst the turmoil, one thing remained clear: their disappearance was not random, not a mere coincidence. It was a sinister puzzle, its pieces scattered across a landscape of fear and uncertainty. And as I gazed out into the new day, I vowed to uncover the truth, no matter the cost, and to confront the darkness that had claimed my friends, leaving me adrift in a sea of guilt and haunting apprehension.